Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome again to this Aurion briefing series. Absolute pleasure to welcome everyone online. And as always, and I keep saying, please grab a pen and paper. There's some very interesting insights that you'll be able to gain from today's session. We're covering a bit. My name's James, and I'll be moderating today's session. And there'll be additional sessions in the coming weeks that we will cover off. So far, what we've really been focused on has been digital transformation and organisations need and desire to be able to bring in new technology into their organisation, what's involved in that, how they actually prepare an RFP or an RFQ or a tender, making sure that they've got the right types of technology for considerations through that process. We've also talked a little bit about balancing the resources, but we thought that was such an important topic that we might make that into a second part of that series or module as well. So we're going to discuss that a bit for that today. And then we will have sessions on setting the stage for project success, overcoming obstacles to project timelines and budgets, measuring success, and then an interactive session at the very end that will be with our hosts that I'll be introducing to you in a moment. As always, I'd like to acknowledge the custodians of the land in which we are on today. We certainly pay our respects to elders past and present. Today's session is brought to us by Aurion, and Aurion, for those of you that don't know or haven't necessarily been part of the first couple of sessions or modules that we've had so far, are a leading payroll organisation in Australia. Over 50 years of experience, have worked and continue to work with organisations of all sizes, a lot of large organisations, enterprise organisations, government organisations, and are paying thousands and thousands of employees every month, week, fortnightly and monthly for a whole bunch of organisations. And I suppose their key skill is making sure that people are compliant, which is really important, that the payroll data, etc., is secure, and their platforms are terrific. But they also provide a whole range of services around managed payroll and assisting organisations to do that. So I encourage you to be able to have a chat with Aurion should you ever need to. So Kx2 are our two. I want to introduce our host from today from Kx2. So we've got Karen Taylor and Karen Keynes, both of which will abbreviate to KK and KT for the sessions again, if that's okay. Look, in the last session, we really talked about, balancing the resources that are required. And I think now, if we just go to the next slide, Casey, I just wanted to maybe touch on the RACI matrix, because to both of you have mentioned to me at times that this is pretty critical and something that organisations can really be able to look at as they're starting to implement technology and be able to gain some real insights. So could you maybe just explain this a little bit further for those that might be on call today that are unfamiliar with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start, and I'm sure KT's got some things to add as we talk through some of this. But RACI stands for the top line that's represented there as a responsibility, accountability, consultation, and informed. So it's about identifying throughout the project who sits within those areas of requirements across each milestone, across each phase. There are some projects where they go down to task level with this, but we find that doesn't always add major value to the way that we work anyway at Kx2. So what we do from a resource assessment perspective at the outset is have a look at across the phases of the project and those milestones and the deliverables that are needed, what roles are required to be a part of that, where they're responsible for completing the work, where they're accountable for making sure that that work gets done, who do we need to consult with in the business, at what levels of business, and who needs to be kept informed but doesn't really need to be, in amongst every detail or every session that's happening. So by having a look at that and breaking it out across this RACI matrix approach, and it is an overview that we tend to do, more so it really helps us to identify any gaps that there might be in the resourcing, as well as placing those key SMEs in the right place, and identifying, further up with regards to who is that person reporting through to in the organisation, and making sure that they are, if they're not part of the project team, that they're across the requirement for their team member, where they sit in the project team to get work done. Because what can often happen is we might have somebody who's responsible for doing or completing work within the project, and their manager or supervisor is not part of the project, and therefore the importance and completeness and time allocation for that project team member to get done what they need to do is not seen as a priority. So it allows us to identify who those people are and have those conversations early on. The other thing it can tend to do is really highlight the gaps and where we need to fill those gaps, and have a conversation with the client and look at, how do you fill those gaps? What is the length of time and need of that gap in your resources? Is it fillable by an internal person that already exists? Does it need an internal person to be employed and recruited into that role? Or is it a short-term, just project-related requirement that could be filled with an external support and resource as well? So there are a lot of considerations, I guess, that sit behind, the RACI matrix overview that we do at Kx2. I know it's part of what lots of people who are doing the project management qualifications, and it's part of what they are taught as a thing to do. And you can do anything with a step-by-step process and get it completed, but it's really understanding how it actually supports the project in the long term and the success of it, that I think for us is where we see that it makes the difference in how we kind of tend to use it, as opposed to just a tick and flick exercise and getting it completed and people slotted into spaces, because that's really easy to do. But if it's not the right resources and the right conversations aren't happening behind that, then it doesn't really mean a lot.
Yeah, and I would gather that a lot of people, hear all sorts of different acronyms of different processes to be able to engage. But I suppose once you've been a part of so many projects and actually then using this type of a framework within it to be able to deliver projects effectively, you really know those key points and making sure that everyone is actually ticked off correctly to ensure that the work that people are starting to do at the start of a project is actually preparing for success, rather than trying to do things on the fly, or that things have been ticked when actually they haven't really been thought about enough to be able to determine some of the challenges that may occur through the length of the project for delivery. I think that's what you're saying, isn't it, KK?
Yeah, and I guess just more so, anybody can fill out a RACI template and put information in it. But if you haven't got the understanding, I guess, of what that means throughout the project and the right sort of fit of people, for that aspect of each area within the RACI that you're looking at, then it doesn't mean anything. Like, you can fill it out, but it's not actually going to support any success. So it's about doing it with the right amount of knowledge and discussion behind it. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And then it becomes, and KT,
Sorry.
I was just going to throw to you there, but then it becomes really a live document, doesn't it? That's right there, right the way through.
Yeah, and we've had this example with a client, James, that they've gone and just filled it out and put anybody's name in it that they felt that it was relevant to. And then in the project, we actually drew on that, the matrix and the RACI matrix, and said, right, you actually need to be consulted because you need to make a decision here, and you're actually accountable for this. And they're, whoa, why me? And we're like, because you've been put forward as this responsibility or this role with this project. And they're like, oh no, that shouldn't be me. And then it has to go back to the hierarchies and the boards and everything to find out, well, this person is making decisions about something that they shouldn't be, or they're not making decisions, and they should be. So it is really important to get it right without just dropping names in. A lot of people do go and start a new software system implementation, and they just fill out the lines. There's a lot of paperwork to start with. There's a lot of ticking and flicking. There's a lot of forms to complete, and then you just send it back. But it is actually usable material that we refer back onto. And in those times when it becomes, well, you are the one responsible for signing this off, and they don't have that authority, or they're not the right person, it actually made them feel very, very uncomfortable in that situation and feel like they were burdened with a lot of pressure that they actually didn't handle very well. So then somebody else goes, well, why did you make that decision? Well, you put me in as being responsible, and it was meant to be my decision. And so it doesn't seem like a very important thing, but actually when you're in a project and the time comes to draw on these areas and people that have been nominated for this role in the project, it becomes very apparent very quickly if there's not much thought being gone into it.
Yeah, or discussions to back it up.
No, that makes sense, but it probably leads me a little bit into the balancing the resources internally. So is it, business as usual versus project work? Because if what you're saying is right there, KT, and people are ticking and flicking, they're potentially putting people into that racy matrix, and they're sort of sitting there going, well, I think that person's probably okay. But then suddenly you've got a situation where the project work is very, very different to what they're doing on a daily basis, and there hasn't been an alignment. So therefore things go off the tracks very quickly. So anything else to elaborate on that?
And I think if it probably circles back to the session number 2 that we did, or something, with ensuring that you've got the right people in the project.
Yeah.
Because you might sit there and go, oh yes, I've got an IT manager and their name is XYZ, and I've got Sarah over here in accounts and she's really good at finances, so I'm going to stick them into the project. Then all of a sudden they're your project people, they're accountable and they're responsible for making decisions. And then the business owner comes in and goes, in this scenario, the business needs, the person who is responsible for making the decisions on the project is deciding whether or not they have an authority process for a payroll. We're going to do a pay run. Do you need it to be authorized? No, it's the person in the responsibility. Of course, we wouldn't let that scenario happen, but it's just an example of where you put the wrong person in there. They could make the wrong decision for the business. And all of a sudden you have this failed implementation because it wasn't set up correctly, or you have to go and do a rehash or a re-implementation because it wasn't built out or designed or configured properly. So it's, all of this coming back in, balancing the business as usual and project work for us is more about the pressures that people are under and the responsibility that being part of a project brings into that BAU. And they do really need to have a thorough understanding of the business needs, the project needs, and then also balancing out their business priorities and everything.
Yeah, probably leads into the next slide there, which is project fatigue. I mean, projects, they're complex, right? I mean, they're not easy. There's a lot of things in there that can go wrong, and, really requires some specialist skills, unquestionably, probably people independent that can actually say, look, we've seen this a lot of times. We understand where these things can potentially go wrong. We can provide some guidance to be able to bring this back pretty quickly, or at least get people to be responsible for the areas they are within the timelines that are required. But I imagine that if people are starting to do their business as usual, day in, day out, suddenly they've got the demands on them of a project. They've also then got the organisation with pressure saying, look, we really need to get this project on in a particular time frame. People are getting burnt out pretty quickly. That probably happens a lot. And then things get missed, critical things, I imagine, where you really have those, the whole benefits of selecting the solution that you did in the first place to achieve your digital transformation goals suddenly aren't being there because you've missed out on a couple of things that people are just haven't quite got around to it, and they just haven't been able to do what they've needed to do. I suppose that's what you're referring to when it sort of comes to some of this project fatigue. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because business as usual, they've usually got a real structure and set schedule to what they do when they do it. You then put a project in on top of that. Something gives when they're in the pressure pot and time is running out and they have to do this task and they have to do that task. So is it a project task? Is it a BAU task? So we see a lot of people put that extra pressure on, and then decisions and tasks don't get completed because they simply just don't have the time to do it. So backfilling, if somebody is going to be put on a project and they do, just say they do payroll, they're the payroll person, you have to actually understand if they're working in the project, they can't be working in their normal BAU for Thursdays and Fridays because, but everybody needs to get paid, so that job can't stop. So you might need to have to look at within your team as to how you backfill that, because not necessarily with a project can you say just bank that for a week or two, or I'll do that Monday. Some of the tasks within a project are really time restrictive. So yeah, just understanding that the BAU, your business has to continue. Your business will continue. You need to adopt this into your new BAU, but to get there, there's a lot of efficiencies and data and detail that needs to go into it. You don't want to put all that burnout and fatigue onto your staff. You actually want to smooth them into it. Otherwise, they will be resistant to the change because it's already too overwhelming for them. So,
yeah, that's good. KK, maybe just add to that a little bit. I mean, you must have seen this on multiple occasions. I mean, surely both of you. I mean, but you're in an organisation. Suddenly, you're seeing, what are the best intentions? They've tried to go about it the particular way, but for whatever reason, it's just gone off rails, and the people, that have been tasked with delivering it just can't. They're either they don't have the skills, they really feel like this is well and above what they're actually being asked to do on a daily basis, and that these things are going off. So have you got any other particular advice for people just in being able to manage, project fatigue generally?
Yeah, and I think it's the understanding of when those points of required increased input into the project happen as well. So it can vary throughout the project. But to give you, some examples, we're working with clients at the moment who are trying to deal with end of financial year. So end of month, end of financial year, and a project kicking off with a whole bunch of discovery sessions going on. There's a key SME who is a gun, but who is trying to balance a lot of workload and turn things around quite quickly in these initial stages. So it's about ensuring that that person is supported, that they've got the ability to complete their BAU, or that their upline is at making sure that they have got that backfill or support to help them with that. So the other examples that I'm thinking of while you were sort of saying some of those things, James, was another client that we have, and we often get called in when things are starting to fall apart in projects, and it's often due to the fact that the resourcing has changed, or sort of things have been extended in the project and they've lost key resources along the way, and those sorts of things. And that can be where you can get a lot of project fatigue, because the people who maybe were driving the project have stepped out, other people have tried to step in and pick it up, but it's not happened successfully, and then they're still trying to balance everything else that's happening for them. So it's really important for project team members to have that right structure around them the whole way through the project, for that to then be flexible and bend where the need arises through the different phases for their varied input that might be required. So yeah, look, I think there's a lot of fatigue that can happen when it's not initially structured and set up properly to support the team members. And also, if it's not resourced properly, then you have that extension of time on a project, and that also lends itself to project fatigue, because really anything that goes past 12 or 18 months as a project is a really long time for people to be trying to balance what they're doing with additional requirements on top of that.
Makes a lot of sense. I think we'll call that a session today. That last point, I think, is critically important. That movement of people in an organisation, they could be moving into a totally different role. They may leave the organisation. They may go on sick leave, maternity leave. There could be a whole bunch of different things that occur, and then suddenly you've had the reliance on that person for the project. They're now gone. We haven't really allowed for it for someone to be replaced there with the adequate skills, back to some of the things that we've covered in other sessions. And so that becomes a never-ending loop. So it's a really good point I think you mentioned there, KK. To Kx2, to both of you, thanks so much for your time today. It's certainly appreciated. I genuinely appreciate your time. I know how busy you are with all the projects that you're working for, all the clients that you've got. But to those people that are out there that might be thinking, look, I think we're looking for some assistance in being able to navigate our digital transformation projects and world, and we really would like to be able to get some outside help with it. Both KK and KT are absolutely terrific and certainly able and capable to be able to come into your organisation, regardless of how big your organisation is, to be able to assist and help with any of those projects. Look forward certainly to our next session, which I think we're covering, which is the setting the stage for project success. So look forward to speaking to you both then. And again, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, James.
James.
Good on you. Take care.